This is something which everyone understands very easily. Everyone is capable of sensing the situation in the world today. There's no one who cannot sense that very deep despair that everyone feels. But it's not a question of only fixing what is external. It is a question also of going within and taking care of the egoistic source of these external problems. Today there are a lot of things that are being taken care of on the outside. There's a lot of healthy food being eaten. There's a lot of care being taken to preserve our health. There's beginning to be care to preserve our planet. People are coming to the consciousness that is needed to address these external social problems. And that's good. But even if those go to even greater lengths than they are going to now, if we don't take care of the problem within ourselves, it's not going to work. No matter how much external work is done, if what's been happening inside isn't being repaired, it's not going to help. It's not going to help the inner problem. The inner problem is something that each person has to do for themselves. And that is the problem of the heaviness of the ego. There's no one who doesn't feel that. We can in these days say, I want something delicious to eat, and we can get it. I want to wear these clothes, and we can put them on. I want to do this with my time, and we can do it. That's possible for anybody. But when it comes to being uncomfortable with our egoistic heaviness, who knows how to rid ourselves of that? When we feel we are too self-aware and self-conscious, and living on our own small energy instead of a greater, larger picture, we don't know what to do about that. And it's the uncomfortability generated by these inner problems that brings about a lot of our external problems. And of course we can solve those external problems by getting what we want to eat, or by doing something that we enjoy doing. But in the end we will always return to this place within ourselves where we are uncomfortable with our own egoistic, narrow self. And this is true with more and more people. This is what the real problem is. And for that reason, we have Zazen. For that reason, we have this practice that is designed to dig in and dig out that ego, to find that place where it isn't happening, to get rid of that filter, to cut away, shave away, dig into the deepest possible roots, and find that place where the water of clear mind is flowing freely. But we can't do that unless each of us does it for ourselves. It can't be done by some kind of external aid. Each person has to do it. And when people look at what we're doing here, for example, doing a sesshin, they think, what a narrow, rigid, difficult way of going about it. But compared to living all your life in this egoistic bind, it's not. The things we're doing here, sitting in this posture, living in this sesshin way of living, clearly it is a very, very rigid and tight, restrictive way of looking at how to live. But it's for the purpose of going to the place where our ego isn't directing our life. For realizing that place where that huge, clear mind freely originates from. To be able to realize that, we have to cut away all of that egoistic noise, all of that external stimulation, and return to that base, where that huge, clear, liberated mind comes from. It's for accomplishing that we live in this way. And when we do that, when we return to this place where we can feel our center free from having to be told what to do by that ego, free from having to be controlled by that ego, then we can take that mind back out into our life in the outside world, and we can start dealing with the external problems from the inside out rather than the outside in. And that's the only way that we are really going to be able to get rid of this egoistic heaviness anyway. And it is for that reason that doing Zazen is so important. To dig into that ego, to root it out, to dig it out at its deepest roots. That is why we have this practice. And for doing that, we are doing Zazen and practicing in Sesshin. When I was young, I wasn't very different from any other kid. I had a very typical kind of childhood. But there came a time when I had to face that dilemma, like all children do, of what I should do with my life and what it should be about. You see, my father was a temple priest, and it was typical then in Japan to do what your father does. Most kids willingly accepted that and went along with that. But I had a great deal of resistance to the idea. It wasn't that I was required to be my father's successor as head of a temple, since I had an older brother. But it was more simply because I just didn't feel like doing that. I always resisted that feeling that I was going to become a priest and be taking over a temple. Instead, I was going to become a psychologist. And the reason I wanted to become a psychologist was because I didn't like myself. There were parts of myself that I really had a hard time dealing with. I couldn't take myself the way I was. I thought the fastest way to fix that was to become a psychologist myself. I wanted to remake those parts of myself that I felt were so contrary to what I saw in other people. I thought becoming a person who could understand people's inner workings was the best way of fixing myself. Well, one day my father asked me to go to my school in Kyoto a little early to do an errand for him. And because I went early, the buses were very, very crowded. I had to push through this packed crowd of people to get onto the bus, and then all the way to the back of the bus to find a seat. And all of a sudden, as I pushed through all these people, I came upon a person who looked like someone I had never seen before. He struck me as a most unusual, a very mysterious person. And he was wearing a robe unlike any I had seen before. It was dyed a mud color, like they wear in India. And he had a presence, a face, that was of such a nature that it was like he was shining or brilliant. And I was astonished by this man sitting there in the middle of this completely busy and full bus, just reading a book. People were standing up and sitting down, but he was completely unconcerned with any of that, but just reading a book in deep concentration. And I just felt that this man was completely different, like no one I had ever seen before. When I looked at his face, it was shining and bright, and the clarity of his face and the sharp features of it made everyone else's face in the whole bus look like kind of murky or clouded. And I had never met or seen a person like this before, and I couldn't figure out what it was that was so amazing about him. But what I did know was that I found it very confusing. As a person who hated temples and hated priests, here I was astonished by a person who was dressed in priest's clothing. There I was, having been brought up in a way I didn't want to continue, thinking that temples and priests were really out of it. And there was this person who I thought had this mysterious presence, who was dressed like a priest. And the thing I remember most was trying to figure out why this person, with all this great depth and mystery, would choose this way of expressing himself. That was to me a very big question at the meeting of this man. So I was so entranced and intrigued by this man and the question he was presenting to me by his whole presence, that when the priest got off, I followed him. And come to find out, it was the very same stop where I was supposed to get off. And it turned out that this person, Yamada Mumon, was the president of the Buddhist college, and he was on his way to Reiyunin, a small Buddhist temple in Mio Shinji. I followed him right to the gate and saw him go in. I became aware of something that was very important then. I realized that psychology wasn't the way to go about it. I saw that the people who were psychologists were human beings, just like their patients. And it seemed clear that the state of that human being's mind, the state of the therapist's mind, was going to affect how the patient was treated or how the patient was able to take care of their own treatment. I read that as a therapist, if you didn't have a great expansive mind, then you couldn't be of any use to the patient. In psychology, you have data, and you have different responses from the patient. But if the doctor doesn't have this great wide mind, it's not going to work. So I was thinking to myself, how am I going to get this big, great mind? I didn't even like my own personality, so how could I become great and expansive? And here I was concerned with this problem, worrying about whether or not I was going to be able to do it or not. And right at that moment, I encountered Mumon Roshi, a great, huge mind right in front of me. And by meeting that person, I realized that doing psychology, to study all these things scientifically, learn how to gather data and experiments and tests, is not the point. To become a person of a great, round, expansive mind is the point. And there is a faster way. Instead of studying psychology, to become that mind is faster. And that's what changed in me when I saw Mumon Roshi. From that time, in fact for 30 years, I stayed with this man who became my teacher, all through high school, at the Buddhist high school, at the Buddhist college, through training in the monastery where Yamada Mumon Roshi was the head training Roshi. Up until today, I have continued, even though Mumon Roshi has passed away, I have continued to receive his teaching. And I can say without any question that what has changed my life and totally put it in the direction that it is in now is this meeting with this one person. Where in the past we each could just consider our own needs and be aware of what the small world around us was requiring, we're now approaching a time when we can't do that anymore. The world is just too connected, just too full of things that are connecting all of us. For example, the amount of information that comes into everybody, it gives us the sense of not needing to judge things for ourselves anymore. We're always being told what to do, what to wear, how things should happen. And in the midst of that, there is the sense that while we need more than ever to connect with other people, we are being more isolated from them. In the same way that our family situation is breaking down, people have fewer and fewer people to really share their hearts with, to really embrace them in the warmth of a family. People's lives have really taken on a sense of isolation, without any way to express how miserable that makes them feel. And along with all of that comes all the business of life, because of all the media, because of all the information, because of the pace of things happening right now. In the middle of this isolated, uncomfortable mind, we are walking around in a world that is so busy, we can't even find time to find out what it is in our mind that is making us so discontent and unhappy. And in order to somehow assuage that feeling, we go into entertainment that has so much stimulation that we're just kind of numbing ourselves to all of that. Or we become intoxicated on things like drugs or alcohol, or a hobby that takes us away from thinking about how unhappy we are inside. Our world has become a place where we are always avoiding facing the core issue and dealing with what's really, really our true nature. Instead, we try to find some kind of satisfaction in an external world outside of ourselves. This is what almost every person is continually walking around trying to do in the midst of this really busy, terribly stimulating time. Even as we sit here in this quiet, beautiful dawn, around us all possible extraneous noises are happening. And it's not a time when you can run away from those noises anymore. Where you are is where they're happening. So the problem is what to do within that noise. We have a great need to be able to find that place in ourselves where there is no scenery at all. That quiet place within where you can just sit and relieve yourself of all the burdens, of all the overstimulation and the busyness and the things that are happening all the time. To just go inside to a quiet place. How many people can really let go of their anxious mind, let go of their busy mind, let go of all those noises and things passing by them all the time? How many people can say that they have moments when they are completely serene, free of all their insecurity, without anxiety, peaceful, and at one with themselves? This is the true state of all human beings, a state that we all have within us, a state that needs nothing else but being alive to make us completely joyful. But how easily have we forgotten that that's all we need, thinking we need so many other things, and convinced by the media and pulled away from that recognition by society. How easily have we forgotten that completely satisfied and perfect place within us that is always with us. To be able to return to that place is what human beings need right now. more than in any other time. To be able to find this place within ourselves, to touch down with our true nature, to return to that ultimately clear mind, which we all, every single one of us, has to begin with. To return back there, to learn how to return to that place and find complete serenity within any given moment is what is the most necessary thing to understand because of the times we're living in. When you are sitting in the posture of Zazen, the first thing that you do is make your posture solid. You don't sit in a vague, unsettled way. You make your legs set firmly. You put your right leg up first, your left leg on top of that for the full lotus. And you make a very firm posture, with the bottom of your lower back being the other part of the triangle that your two legs make. And with that very firm base, you raise your spine up. It is very important to make your spine raise up straight and naturally, without having any tension in it, so that your whole body is relaxed and there's a natural feeling to it. With that naturally stretched up feeling, you then feel a solidity in your whole body, which allows you to do your breathing in a natural way. Now usually we call a natural breath one that is coming from our lungs, but breathing from our lungs tends to be a rather intellectual kind of breath. It's a high breath. So we breathe for Zazen when we don't want to be intellectual in our abdomen. We breathe from a place about 1 inch below our navel. As we breathe, we allow our breath to travel down to our navel. We follow it down to the place below our navel, to our tanden. And we do it in such a way that it's a relaxed flowing breath, not a tight forced kind of breath. This kind of breathing is very important because if we are trying to clear our mind and we don't have this kind of breath, we will just be fighting intellectual things. So we breathe, allowing it to come down, and at the same time keeping everything very, very relaxed, not tightening or pushing into the breath, but letting this breath as if we are blowing it into that area in our lower abdomen. This abdominal breathing is very important and has been found in all the breathing instruction from the time of the Buddha, in yoga, through the Chinese Taoist practices such as Tai Chi and Qi Kung. All of them have given us the same kind of point to follow in our breathing. And by doing this, we bring all of our center of energy to that area. To gather any kind of true energy, we have to breathe in this way. And if we can bring our breathing to this place, we can dislodge ourselves from that cluttered mind that we all are being pursued by all the time. Only by doing this kind of breathing can we clear this mind of all the thoughts that are preventing us from realizing our pure nature. Realizing this pure nature is the point of doing Zazen, but if we don't have this kind of breathing, then this kind of practice won't be possible. So once we have our breathing with our concentration always focused on our tanden, then we can work on clearing our mind by keeping our breath always coming down to this tanden area, keeping it smooth, flowing out long, and breathing in that way. What we are doing when we bow and prostrate is something that everyone needs to do. Probably most people can't even imagine that this is possible, but in fact we are bowing to that pure nature which is in all human beings. And that is something that everyone who comes to Zen is working with and towards, to be able to realize that connection, that awareness of the world as something that is unified. Now, if you were to tell someone to bow to someone they don't like, then they would probably have a very hard time bowing to someone they don't like. But that is not the point. We are bowing to that part of all human beings that is able to be clear, pure, and well-developed. Our purpose is to make ourselves smaller than that great mind that exists within all of us. That is the purpose of doing prostration. To put your forehead down on the ground where everyone walks. This is an expression of the awareness of that cleared state of mind that we get through Zazen. Once you realize that all people are equal and unified, What do you do to express it? You prostrate. Because in that prostration itself is expressed that awareness that there is a mind that is greater than your own small ego. But like I said, people who feel that they will bow to something they like and not bow to something they don't like, almost 100% of them won't bow to something they don't like. That's how they see it, as a choice and a preference. But when they understand that it is something they are doing because they truly want to realize that pure, clear mind by getting rid of their ego, then they can do it. Because you must let go of that ego in order to bow that low. By bowing and prostrating, you are crushing the ego. You are breaking the ego. So bowing and prostrating is a sign of, a practice of, an expression of the breaking of that ego. And that is the purpose for which people of all countries and all nationalities are doing the Zen practice. But they have to understand why they are doing it, what it represents, that it is not bowing down to some idol. If you do Zazen and you realize this true, pure mind, then you do prostrations to express it, to manifest it, to reveal it. And once people reach the point where they can understand what it is for, then they realize that it is the true religious principle that is uniting all people and which can be guiding everyone at the same time. When I went into the monastery, I thought it would be different for me. I thought I was going to go in there and be enlightened right away. I wasn't going to go in there and wait around for enlightenment, like everyone else who was just there hanging out, not taking it seriously, not getting to the point. I was determined that I was one of the chosen ones who was going to get immediately enlightened when I went into the monastery. So I went into it wholeheartedly, totally, intensely, giving everything I had to it. And when it came to the Rohatsashin, a meditation intensive which honors the Enlightenment Day of the Buddha on the 8th day of December, a time when the energy and the burning intensity of the monks in the monastery is so hot you can almost feel it in the air. When I entered the Rohatsashin, I was determined that during this sesshin I would reach enlightenment. I wasn't going to wait around like those other guys who weren't getting enlightened in the monastery. I was going to go for it, and it was going to happen now. So I came to the sesshin, the first day, second day, third day, the fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, seventh day. Still no enlightenment. I sat as hard as I could, everyone did, but still no enlightenment. And it came to the 8th day, when everyone is supposed to be sharing in the wonder of the enlightenment experience in the same way the Buddha did on his day of enlightenment, when he realized his own true nature upon seeing the morning star. And still, nothing happened. And for the first time I was completely frustrated, disappointed. I didn't know what to do. When it came to the ceremony that honored the Buddha's enlightenment, I was beside myself with despair. Here I had thought that I could really do it, that I had planned to, I had decided I was going to, that I had been chosen, and it didn't happen. Never had I felt such great disappointment, and I had no idea what to do next. After that sesshin, I kept going for another year, and then a year after that, and still I did not have any deep enlightenment experience. And so then, after 2 years without a deep enlightenment experience, I went to my teacher, Mumon Roshi, and I said, "I'm leaving. I can't do it here. It's not working. I'm going away to sit by myself." And Mumon Roshi looked at me for a long time, and he said, "That's fine. You can go. But what happens if you don't get enlightened?" And I answered him, "I'll think about that when it doesn't happen." I took everything out of the monastery. I left prepared for never coming back, and I headed for the mountains. And I went here and there in the mountains, sitting by myself, sitting as hard as I could, not even knowing what day it was, not even knowing how much time I was spending there. I just went and sat and sat and sat in various places in the mountains. And I remember well this one place when I was between Yamaguchi Prefecture and Hiroshima Prefecture. I was sitting on top of this one mountain. I hadn't seen anyone for many days, and suddenly someone was coming up the mountain. Of course, in the mountains, people are friendly to each other, because there are not so many people in the mountains. I was doing zazen there, and they came up to me and asked if I was a person of training. And I told them yes, I was. And they asked how long I had been there and what I was doing. And then they told me how lucky I was. And at these words I was so deeply struck that my whole life was again changed. They said to me, "We are also a kind of people of practice. We do the chanting of the Buddha's name. But we aren't lucky like you that we can take our whole life and give it up for training. We have to work from Monday to Saturday. And in our tiny time of freedom from Saturday night to Monday morning, we come up on the mountain and practice our chanting of the Buddha's name. But you are so lucky. You are able to devote your whole life to training. And we're so envious of you that you are able to do that." And at that I was completely knocked out. I realized the deep meaning of what they were saying. For them it was quite straightforward and nothing at all particular. But it made me realize what I'd been missing. I had been doing, in my own small, narrow way, exactly what I wanted to do. What they were having to do was within a social situation of having to work, having to keep their training going, having only a very small amount of time to devote to it totally. And here I was, already blessed with this chance to give everything I had to training, to devote myself completely to training. And I was running away from that and cutting myself off, shutting myself up in a small, narrow place in my mountain training all by myself. And I realized right then the mistake I'd been making. And I went right back to the monastery. I knew what I had to do now. And at that moment it was like all of my burdens dropped off, as if someone had hit me on the back and everything was awakened within. I realized that there was nothing I needed to do for myself in the first place. If every moment that came along I just took it as it was, then there was nothing that could be a problem to me anymore. That small, narrow way in which I had been looking at my enlightenment, my thing to have to do. I have to do this for myself. That is what had been bothering me all along, from the very beginning, through that day on the mountain when I realized that there was no self to be bothered with it. I had been crushing myself and making myself miserable, worrying about this problem of my enlightenment and realizing it for myself, making myself come to a conclusion that was in fact found in the living of every single day. If I did nothing, if I didn't even worry about my own problems, things always came to me. And those things that came to me in every single day, to accept those was my training and my way of expressing my enlightened mind. No matter what it was that came to me every day, the next thing that came, the next situation I found myself in, to live that totally as my training was what I had to do. Not to go isolate myself up on a mountain, closed off from everyone, turning them all away, and worrying about my own small state of mind. That wasn't the point at all. But to go and be what every day brought to me, that was my practice and my expression of my enlightenment. And ever since I realized that, my whole life has been completely different. I know there is no problem for myself, because there is no one there to feel that there is a problem. Just to take what every day brings and do that with my best, total, wholehearted effort as a person of practice. That was the way to live. Often enlightenment or kensho or satori is considered to be some kind of unusual experience or something external or some kind of special phenomenon. But it's not like that. There may be some kind of sudden revelation or some kind of sudden perception, but it's not something that is that unusual or that strange and foreign that we come upon or that comes upon us. What it is an ability to see without any interruption of the ego, without any filtering of the ego. And since we're all walking around seeing things through our ego filter almost all the time, to suddenly be able to see without that filter is a surprise. But it is nothing that we have ever not had. They say that the mind of a baby is something we can compare this to. A baby isn't seeing things from the egoistic place. It is seeing directly and clear. It's the exact same kind of thing when we are seeing without the ego filter. We see that there is nothing to be analyzed in it. When you are seeing a flower, you're not thinking that it's red. Or seeing a bird, you're not thinking what its name is. You are just seeing directly. When we talk about enlightenment, we are talking about that mind which is perceiving in every moment without the obstruction of an egoistic filter. The experience of that mind and realizing where it is and realizing where it is coming from is what is called enlightenment or kensho or satori. It is not some kind of supernatural state of mind that we are able to enter or that comes upon us. It is not like some kind of altered state of consciousness. To think that we are trying to do this practice for some kind of narrow experience for the individual, thinking that we are going to come upon some big experience someday. This is a very low-level understanding of what this enlightenment is.